So, how are you guys doing? And I'm gonna be bringing back, or not necessarily bringing back, but I'll be touching up on something that I've had for a while and just never really talked about. And this is that it starts raining. I love my life. So this is a 2002 Murray wide body, and of course I walk out here into the barn and it's perfectly fine, not raining, and then as soon as I get in here it just starts downpouring. This is a 2002 Murray. Now, I made a mistake. This is not a wide body. This is, I don't know what they call it, but it's not a wide body. I can get you the model number after I move this bolt that I sheared. Yes, because that was fun yesterday. And I'll talk about this later. This is part of the reason why the bolt sheared. Now here is the model number. 4050 8X92G. Pardonnez-moi. Tons of flies and wasps and stuff in here. But this is my 2002 Murray, model number 4050 8X92G. That is our custom battery holder. We just bent a piece of aluminum just to keep that in place. Those are my fenders that we custom made. They just bolt right onto the hood. We just drilled a hole through the hood and put us a nylock nut and a bolt with a few washers on there. We used the nylock nut just so it wouldn't vibrate loose. And then that brings us over here. This is our second fender. As you can see, we wrote number 2 on there. This is our second fender that we were going to put on. The reason we did that is because that they're cut out differently and they're not the same. This one's cut out specifically for this side, and that one is cut out specifically for that side. So we can't use this one over there. So number 2 goes on the right, number 1 goes on the left. Now, I noticed that this one was originally supposed to be sitting just like that other one over there, but it had rotated down like that. So I loosened the bolt and rotated it back up the way it should have been, and then I went to go tighten the bolt. This is a 7/16, I believe this is coarse thread. You might be able to tell. I'm on camera. It's not going to focus. I'm pretty sure that's 7/16 coarse thread. Yeah. So I had loosened it, I angled my fender back the way I wanted it, and I went to go tighten it. Apparently I tightened it too much, to the point where you can actually see an indentation in the washer where the bolt was, or where the nut was. I had tightened that nut up against that washer so much that it literally made an indentation in the nut, or in the washer, I mean, and just sheared the bolt. I was tightening it and just my wrench just popped loose and my socket popped loose, and I thought, well, normally only my crescent wrench pops loose because it slides off. And I look under there and I noticed that my washer, I had tightened that washer so much against this sheet metal hood that it had literally stuck to the hood. And I looked down below me in between my feet and I saw that the bolt and the nut and the 2 separate halves of the bolt were just sitting on the ground. Now you may have seen two things that are pretty obvious: fender flares and my rack. This is not exactly the kind of rack that I wanted. We just had this one laying around, and I figured we might as well use this one instead of making our own. I kind of wished we made our own, because I originally wanted one that bolted down to my chassis, and then it came out a ways and then had supports going down to the frame. But this one, that's the way I originally wanted, you know, like a cargo rack like that. That's exactly what I wanted. And my dad was like, well, we got a rack up there. And I thought to myself, oh yeah, I can, that's nice. I don't have to go find some metal mesh. I don't have to weld up anything. Or we did have to weld up some stuff, but I don't have to weld up much stuff. I don't have to really pay attention to getting stuff even or anything like that. We can just make us a way to expertly catalog this on here. And that brought us down to down there. Now, as you can see down here, there's 4 bolts and a few washers, and I also have my exhaust bolted on there, and a ball hitch that trailers can't even fit on. Now, what those bolts are holding on is a piece of 1/4 inch, I can't remember if 1/4 inch is 16 gauge or 12 gauge steel, or I forget what. I'm not very good with the gauges. But those bolts are holding on that piece of 1/4 inch steel plate. And we just used, there was 2 bolts, or 2 holes down there, and we just took us a little I don't know what you'd call them. I call them hole starters, but they're just little pieces of metal, and you hit them real hard with a hammer, and they make a dent in the metal where you start a hole, or where you drill a hole. We just used one of those, reached up under there, hit those 4 holes out on that sheet. We went over to our press, or not our press, our punch, because take in mind, this is at our family business, K&S Steel Fabrication Incorporated. I should have been wearing my hat today. I'm not. I'm wearing a Phoenix hat today because I like Phoenix. Hey, Rocky, you're old and decrepit. So we used a punch instead of a drill and just punched out 4 holes and then bolted it to there. And then we took a piece of, I believe it's 2 inch by 3 inch, so 2 inch by 3 inch tube steel, and welded it to the top of the, very top of the plate. As you can see, it's welded. It's kind of hard to see because of my terrible lighting. So we welded that there. Then I got that rack and I held it up there pretty much level. And we measured it, put us 2 lines on the rack, and then I held it up there and got my dad up under there, and he welded 3 little welds right there. And I kind of wish that we did just one nice good weld all the way across to hold it, but we just did 3 little welds. And I mean, I feel like one long weld would have held it up better, but if I take this rag off of here, I mean, as you can see, I can flip my motor or my mower up with it, and yeah, so that right there is perfectly strong. Wished it was a little stronger, but it's fine. This is the next thing, or actually this is the next thing. Now, this right here is my fender flares. I got this idea from Fearlessfront on YouTube. I'll link him down in the description. He also did the same thing. Took some landscaping plastic, and it's what you use to separate like flower beds and stuff from the rest of your yard to keep the weeds and stuff from growing into your flower bed. Fearlessfront, what he did is he cut a series of like snips into the metal and took a pipe wrench or took some kind of wrench and bent the metal in, so he had a flat surface under it, and that one allowed him to pop rivet the plastic on. I just used zip ties because I'm cheap and lazy, so I don't want to have to do all that. And that also, because he bent that in where the tires are at, allows him to use bigger tires than I can. So yeah, that was just a cheap, like 10-minute little thing. We just took a drill, drilled a hole through the chassis, drilled a hole through the landscaping plastic, did that 4 times on each side, and then just put as a zip tie through each hole. You can also probably notice this. This is not what came on this rack, because as you can tell, that rack folds down, and it can also hold probably about maybe 220 pounds around that area, and for a decent amount of time. And these are not what originally came on here. Originally there was a old cable that went from here and then got bolted on with this bolt right here, because you can see there's 2 bolts and it bolted onto this top one. Both of those were real bad and rusty. The little plastic part of it had worn off over time, and I believe it was this one over here. I was standing on it one day to get my top tires up so we could set something under the axle to work on it, and it just popped. So I made this. It's a self-leveling system, and essentially what it was is just a long piece of this pretty decently strong cable. And it's strong. I couldn't cut it with bolt cutters. I had to use a grinder to cut it in a cutting pad or cutting disc. Cut it out, looped it from there around through these little things. I drilled me a hole through my supports for my rack and put one of these little things on both sides as even as I could get it. I believe it's 1 inch across and ½ an inch down. Then threw my cable from that side around, looped it through here, and then just held it there. And then we took some of these cable ties, or whatever you want to call them, and we bolted all those down. I kind of wish that I gave this side a little bit more slack, because there's not much slack there, and as you can see, this side has an abundance. So I kind of like about an even amount on both sides, so I might fix that later. And then we just grabbed some red electrical tape, which I've never seen red electrical tape. I've seen green, blue, and black, never red. And taped those together so we didn't cut ourselves on it. And yeah, that's about it for the cable. Now we get on to the good bits over here. I made a custom little thing. It was just a bolt, drilled a hole through my hood and then through this little dash here, and I put a piece of rubber under the dash in between the gas tank so I didn't puncture my gas tank. But it's a bolt through there and a nut on this side. You might be able to see it down there. I don't know. So yeah, you just slide that on there. I put me a washer on there so I don't scrape up the paint that bad. And then I put just your little standard sized wing nut. I don't know what size this was. I'm wanting to say this was 7/16 bolt. We have extra 7/16 bolt or 7/16 bolts here in abundance. So most of the little bolts that I use to hold stuff together and just random little things are probably going to be 7/16. I personally prefer metric measurements, but whatever. Now we get to the good bits here. Custom exhaust. That's just, we just took and welded up some pipe. We cut the original exhaust off right there, welded us a pipe that went down to here, and then down to here, and then that goes down to there, and then that straight pipe goes all the way down. Or I think that straight pipe ends like over there, and then another piece. My dog is barking at the thunder. And then another piece welds onto there and comes down to here. And we had it just like that for a while, but I thought it was way too loud. Like, this thing was ear-piercing loud. I rarely ever got it up to full RPMs because it was so loud. It was, if I was using it, it was almost always at idle, and it was still able to drive. It just bogged down the engine. Then my dad was at Tractor Supply getting him some goodies, and he saw this little muffler. It's like a little can muffler, I guess you could say, and it had a threaded end of a pipe on that side that's actually inside our exhaust. It was threaded, like you could screw it onto something. Well, we just took a welder and welded it on there. That's just all good and fun. Now, on to this good part. This is a 17.5 horse Briggs Intech. It's overhead valve OHV. It's treated me well. This is kind of a different engine. Most people use just regular like Briggs 14 horse OHVs or like 12 horse flatheads, stuff like that. I was lucky enough that my grandparents had an old Troy-built, and I believe it was a pony. A Troy-built pony, I think it was 1998 model. And it had this engine sitting in it. And I thought to myself, hey, I'm making a mud mower. My grandpa died back a few years ago. My grandma doesn't know what to do with the mower. We already have a zero turn over there that my grandpa bought from my grandpa on my dad's side. This all came from my grandpa on my mom's side. He bought a zero turn, so he had no use for this really. So I took that to advantage. Pardonnez-moi, thunder. And got this engine. I believe there might be it might have a bad crankcase seal because there's a bunch of oil leaking everywhere, and not just by the dipstick. There's oil over on this side, down here, and back behind in that corner as well. So I think it might have a bad crankcase seal or some kind of bad engine block seal or gasket. It runs just fine, and it does everything I want it to. We made our custom pull start, which you might see only has 2 bolts and is quite different than regular people's. Or regular people's that actually do this, because regular people don't do this stuff with lawnmowers. That's because mine did not have the 3 Torx bit screws holding on the guard. It actually had these 4 screws in the fan that hold the guard on. But there were 2 holes that bolted this fan down to the flywheel. So I used those 2 holes to advantage, bolted down those, and then there's a nut up under there. I don't know if you can see it. A nut and a washer down under there to keep this fan in place, and just to help keep that in place. It does work. I would try it, but it's really hard to use with one hand. I mean, it's just simple. We took this, tied a knot, or drilled a hole through the piece of wood, sanded down the ends, tied a knot on one end, and so the other end is free. And you just wrap this rope. You put the rope through here, and then wrap it around and pull it. This motor turns clockwise, so it turns like this. Well, I guess you could say it turns, clockwise, because if that's 12 and that's 6, it turns like that. So Yeah. Alright, so running low on time here. I got three last things that I did. First thing is I just moved my, we had to use this solenoid out of that mower out there that we got the engine from for the wiring harness. I couldn't fit the original wiring harness on here, so we had to use that engine's, which means that the solenoid for the battery is bolted right here. It's normally right there, and the old solenoid is actually still in it. It's down right through there somewhere. But because of that, we had to redo the wiring, so we just thought, well, while we're doing wiring, why don't we just add some of this stuff? So these Murrays have a thing right here that you can unscrew and get to your wiring system. So we took advantage to this and cut out our holes and put in the ignition and the hour meter. And I believe this engine has 212 hours on it. So it's been used. Second thing, my brakes. I got this idea from Fearlessfront as well as my fender flares. Got this idea from him. It's just my brake system. I disconnected my brakes from my clutch pedal over there. It's just some linkage over here. And this is not a bicycle brake handle. You might see that. This is actually a clutch. I believe it's a clutch for that Boland's tiller right there. I mean, it does the same thing. We just took a hose clamp and a zip tie and mounted it to here because it had these nice little slots cut out in it. We did not cut those, and it was just big enough to fit a hose clamp through there. So that is my brakes and the additional T-handle shifter. And this is, I believe, 3/4 inch bar, and we just welded it straight onto the other shifter. This, I'm not going to go into real big depth about this. I'll probably make a separate video on it. But this conduit runs down into a hole that I drilled, and that hole has a piece of fuel line in it so that that sharp metal doesn't chafe up my conduit. And then that conduit goes down, you can't see it because my tire's in the way, but that conduit goes down to my brake lever, and then there's a spring holding back my brake lever. It's just that simple. Alright, next thing. Alright, so our next thing is our pulley swap. We went down to Tullahoma, got us a pulley from Tractor Supply because we didn't go to the one in our town for some reason. Went down to there, got us a 5-inch pulley to put on the back. The original pulley's still on the front. I want to eventually buy a 6-inch pulley to put on the front, so it's a 6-inch to a 5-inch. I don't know what that ratio is. It'd be 5 divided by 6, right? Yeah, so I have no idea what that is. No, it'd be 6 divided by 5, which is going to be 1 and 1/5 ratio, I guess you could say. I don't know. But 5-inch pulley on the back, original pulley on the front. It goes about 6 miles an hour. I'm either going to pulley swap the front, or I'm just going to buy outright just a new pulley to put on the front, and then just make a separate sleeve that'll hold it up that I can bolt it on with. But yeah, that's about it. This is my mower kind of reviewed. I will go over some of this stuff in depth later, but right now just is not the time with the rain and everything, and I'm just running short on time. So hope you guys enjoyed. Say bye-bye to Rocky down there, and have yourselves a good one.